Listen, keep your voice down. The walls are thinner than you think, and what I am about to share could twist history's knife in your mind forever. Picture a damp stone corridor lit by a single trembling lantern, its flame shivers because something down there breathes without lungs. That gasp you hear? It is the past, alive, ravenous, waiting for you. For 8 generations the Ravencroft name has been scrubbed from polite ledgers, yet their handiwork still throbs beneath governments, corporations, and even the pets drifting at your feet. Forget sanitized textbooks. They were designed to keep men like you obedient, counting hours until retirement while unseen hands milk your labor. But the Ravencrofts mastered a deeper economy, a suffering converted into power. In 1825 Ezra, Silas, and Caleb carved the Church of the Pure Spirit from black shale outside Ravenwood, New York. They preached that agony clarifies the soul, and their followers begged for the blade. Inside windowless chambers, bones were etched with sigils mapping the nervous system like a haunted atlas, each notch a data point for controlling flesh, then nations. You think torture ended with medieval dungeons? It simply went corporate. Techniques refined in those catacombs were sold, discreetly, to emerging institutions desperate for control, a penitentiaries learning how long the human cry can bend before breaking, psychiatric wards eager to mine hallucinations for data, intelligence agencies not yet formed but already whispering of enhanced interrogation. The Ravencrofts were the dark seed money. Why reveal this now? Because fragments of their ledger surfaced in a declassified customs crate last month, stamped with a crest that matches today's most influential think tank. That tank shapes the policies your sons will fight and die for. The circle is unbroken, gentlemen. Yet most will scroll past, anesthetized by algorithmic comfort? Not you. I see the restlessness behind your eyes. You suspect greatness demands dangerous knowledge. Lean closer. Every light around you is purchased with someone's scream. And if you trace the wiring far enough, it leads back to the brothers who believed evil could be perfected. I'm handing you the map. Step 1 begins now. Tonight we follow that map, descending level by level until the air itself turns to knives. There is no safe word. There is only whether you keep walking or turn back. Decide quickly, history is listening. Spine or silence, choose now. By 1829, the Ravencroft brothers had built more than just a church. They'd constructed a psychological fortress, stone by stone, doctrine by doctrine, designed to trap the soul before the body ever touched the altar. It started subtly, a sermon here, a cleansing fast there. But beneath it all pulsed the same message, over and over again: pain is proof. Pain is passage. And the followers, they obeyed, because men in crisis don't seek comfort. They seek meaning. And the Ravencrofts offered meaning with sharp edges. Widow? Your grief has purpose. Criminal? Your sins can be burned clean. Fatherless? The Spirit will father you now, if you bleed. And slowly, the villagers of Ravenwood stopped looking for salvation in the sky. They looked into the eyes of 3 men who stared back without blinking. Let me be clear, this wasn't mass hysteria. It was method. Ezra, the orator, spoke like thunder stitched with scripture. Silas, the scholar, recorded every moan during purification, refining it into protocol. And Caleb didn't speak to humans. He claimed to hear the blueprint behind the veil. He called it the divine anatomy, an invisible network of energies buried in bone, sinew, and fear. He mapped it with precision. And in time, he learned how to rewrite it. The rituals grew darker. The trial of drowning. The trial of heat. The breaking of the will through rhythmic starvation and hymns sung in reverse. By the end of 1831, the first underground chambers had been hollowed out behind false walls and candlelit corridors. They weren't just dungeons. They were laboratories, temples to a new kind of faith, a domination by design. You want the forbidden? Here it is. The Ravencrofts weren't deluded zealots. They were pioneers of something our institutions still use behind closed doors. Behavior modification. Neural trauma imprinting. Identity stripping. These methods weren't lost, they were purchased. Absorbed into places with acronyms and marble lobbies. The Ravencrofts were drafted into history's bloodstream, not erased, and the most loyal followers, the vessels of the spirit, were the first prototypes. Their screams weren't warnings. They were blueprints. The body reduced to a system of switches. Flip them right, and you can turn any man into anything. A believer. A killer. A servant who smiles while obeying. You still think the Ravencrofts died in 1862? No, brother. They evolved. They upgraded. And their fingerprints are on the very systems you trust most today. Keep listening. Truth is never safe. But neither is silence. Ritualized suffering was never the endgame. It was the training ground. By the winter of 1833, the Ravencrofts had perfected a cycle so precise it mirrored military indoctrination, but buried beneath spiritual language. It began with confession, not to cleanse the soul, but to weaponize guilt. Every secret, every shame, every trauma, catalogued by Silas into what he called soul files. Next came submission, where the body was broken in stages through deprivation, sleep fragmentation, and isolation cloaked as divine silence, but the final stage was the most disturbing, conversion. The moment when pain didn't just hurt, it made sense. The vessels began to believe they deserved it. Worse, they needed it. This is how the Ravencrofts created human tools. Men and women willing to torture each other in the name of purification, because they saw it not as cruelty, but as love. You want to understand control? That's it. When obedience doesn't require chains, only belief, their secret wasn't brutality. It was intimacy. They studied their followers the way biologists study cells. Ezra would spend hours with converts, identifying their deepest ache, then feeding it back to them wrapped in prophecy. Silas encoded those patterns into ritual sequences. And Caleb touched the psyche like a virus. He'd whisper a phrase into a man's ear, just a phrase. And weeks later, that same man would offer his own child for elevation, smiling with pride. This wasn't a cult. This was a prototype for institutionalized trauma conditioning. And here's the part they'll never teach you in school, it worked. By 1834, nearly a third of Ravenwood had submitted everything, homes, gold, bodies, to the Church of the Pure Spirit. Farmers became enforcers. Mothers became mourners. Children were trained to smile while reciting the 7 trials. No one resisted. Not because they couldn't. Because they didn't want to. Look around your world now. How many systems ask for your pain and sell it back as virtue? How many corporations engineer exhaustion then market self-care? How many leaders break the spirit just to sell salvation in quarterly doses? It all begins here. With the Ravencrofts, and I'm telling you this not to horrify you, but to wake you. If you've ever felt like your suffering was being farmed, it was. And still is. We've inherited a world shaped by men who knew how to make obedience feel holy. The question is, what are you still kneeling to? You're not watching a video. You're walking into a tomb. Keep going. The worst is yet to come. By 1836, the Church of the Pure Spirit had become a machine, precise, silent, and self-reinforcing. From the outside, it was a model of devotion. Clean streets. Industrious hands. Smiling faces. But beneath that carefully manicured surface pulsed an unspeakable truth. Every smile was earned through agony. The Ravencrofts didn't rule with fear. Fear fades. They ruled with something far more enduring, ritualized identity destruction. One convert described it as the slow erosion of the self until the voice inside your head doesn't sound like you anymore. That voice was theirs. It began with names. Members were no longer called by birth names. They were assigned designations based on perceived spiritual weakness. Ash vessel, hollow servant, child of lack. They were told this was humility. In truth, it was psychological reprogramming, the fracturing of ego through divine shame. The second step was mirroring, a system where followers were paired and instructed to report each other's sins. Every betrayal was recorded by Deacon Silas and rewarded with praise. Loyalty became measured in the ability to destroy your brother's soul before he destroyed yours. And the more you harmed others in God's name, the more purified you were considered. This is what modern institutions call compliance ecosystems. What HR departments now package as performance metrics. What intelligence agencies used decades later in black site programming. Do you see it now? The Ravencrofts weren't anomalies, they were blueprints, and then, there were the children. From 1837 onward, the church began what they called sanctified conception. Pairs were selected to breed under ritual conditions. Their offspring were raised in silence until the age of 3, no names, no touch beyond necessity. No eye contact unless during prayer. These children became something different, detached, compliant, responsive only to the cadence of ritual. By 8, they were performing the 7 trials on others. By 10, they were requesting it for themselves. 1 Journal, smuggled out by a fleeing mother, read, "And my son does not cry anymore. He stares into the lantern light like he's remembering a home he was never born into. If this disturbs you, good. Let it. Because versions of this model now exist in institutions dressed in clinical white, or branded with slogans about belonging. But belonging to what? A system that feeds on fracture, and if you're still watching, it means something inside you hasn't gone silent yet. Keep it alive. Keep yourself alive, because next, we descend into the catacombs. Where the Ravencrofts stopped simulating death, and started manufacturing it. The catacombs were never just about storage. They were about silence. Permanent, irreversible silence. Hidden beneath the Church of the Pure Spirit was a subterranean labyrinth designed not to conceal death, but to normalize it. By 1838, the underground complex had grown into 7 distinct chambers, each one calibrated to strip away another layer of the soul. The chamber of preparation, where initiates were kept without light or sound for days, their minds unraveling in total sensory deprivation. The chamber of trials, where screams were absorbed by thick stone walls, never reaching the surface. And at the very center, the chamber of saints, there, the dead did not decay. They were preserved, bodies from earlier elevations were embalmed and posed in positions of worship. Eyes sewn open. Mouths parted in mid-prayer. Children displayed with palms upward, as if receiving eternal light. The Ravencrofts called it the choir of silence. But the silence wasn't holy. It was programmed obedience carved into the flesh of corpses. The message was clear, this is what awaits you when your suffering pleases us. Death was no longer an end, it was a promotion. The final reward for absolute submission. Those who entered the chamber of saints didn't leave unchanged. Witnesses described a profound disorientation, a fog that made it difficult to speak, or even remember who they were. That's not mysticism. That's trauma imprinting. A known phenomenon in psychological warfare. A sudden, overwhelming stimulus collapses identity, making it easier to implant new beliefs. That's what the Ravencrofts mastered. Collapse and install. It was no accident that after visiting the saints, followers became fanatically loyal. They'd volunteer for rituals they once feared. Offer up children without hesitation. They were no longer seeking salvation. They were chasing death, not because they wanted to die, but because they'd been taught that death wanted them. You've seen versions of this in modern life. Not in catacombs, but in culture. People worshipping icons of death, pain, despair, calling it fashion, calling it art. Repeating mantras they don't understand. Smiling while they starve their minds and poison their bodies. This is what institutional trauma does. It doesn't just hurt you. It teaches you to beg for the next blow. And now, we must ask a dangerous question. What if the Ravencrofts didn't invent this? What if they inherited it? What if their church was not an origin, but a continuation? In the next section, we'll open the oldest book they tried to bury. And read what came before the Ravencrofts ever arrived. Keep watching. You're not ready. But readiness was never the point. Before the Ravencrofts ever set foot in Ravenwood, the land already carried a curse. Locals spoke of strange lights in the forest. Of voices heard at night, chanting in languages no one could place. The native Mohican people avoided the region entirely, referring to it as Nokwamuk, place of deep hunger. This wasn't metaphor. It was ancestral memory. Because long before the Church of the Pure Spirit rose from dark stone, that land hosted another cult, far older, and far more primal. In 1797, a trapper named Elias Mathis discovered a stone circle buried beneath the hills. What he described in his journal defies reason. Monoliths carved with spirals, notched stars, and humanoid figures with animal skulls and reversed limbs. Beneath the circle, he found bones, hundreds. Not buried, but arranged. Patterns that only made sense when viewed from above. Federal surveyors later dismissed the discovery as natural limestone anomalies. But those pages, stored in a restricted archive at the Library of Congress, contain drawings identical to symbols found on the Ravencroft ritual platforms nearly 40 years later. Coincidence? No. This was continuity. When the Ravencroft brothers arrived in 1825, they claimed divine revelation. But internal letters between Ezra and Silas, recovered after the cult's collapse, reveal something darker. They were following instructions. One letter, dated 1823, reads that the symbols are older than language. They align with solstices, equinoxes. Whoever carved them knew the anatomy of the soul. We must not alter them. Only replicate. Replicate. Not invent. Not receive from heaven. Replicate. Ask yourself, how did these rural ministers with no formal education gain mastery over trauma-based indoctrination, chemical embalming, and psychological fracture? The answer is chilling. They found a manual. And they obeyed it. Silas refers to this text only o.nce, calling it the Crimson Codex. Never published. Never acknowledged. It's said to be written on human parchment in a language resembling Aramaic, but with reverse syntax. Multiple intelligence historians, off the record, have hinted that fragments of the codex were later recovered by the Office of Strategic Services in 1946 and incorporated into early MKUltra studies. So now you understand, the Ravencrofts were not madmen. They were students of something ancient, buried, and deeply organized. This is where we descend past cult, past crime, into civilizational programming. If you're still with me, comment below this phrase twice. The shepherd knows the path. The shepherd knows the path. That phrase is a marker, for those ready to shed the old skin and awaken to the structure behind the structure. You've felt it all your life. That there's more than they told you. And now, we begin to prove it. Next, we uncover the federal files they tried to burn. Stay focused. Stay quiet. Stay free. In 1933, under the cover of the Great Depression, the federal government attempted to erase the last known traces of the Ravencroft legacy. A small team of agents from a newly formed intelligence division, predecessor to the OSS, was dispatched to Ravenwood. Their orders: seal the catacombs, destroy all remaining documents, and classify the site as a geological hazard. But one man disobeyed. Agent Lowell Decker was a linguistics expert and former seminary student, chosen for his ability to interface with radical religious materials. What he found beneath the Church of the Pure Spirit did not fit into any known theology. His private journal, declassified only in 2002, tells the true story. The catacombs are not crude. They are engineered. Angles correspond to star alignments. The stone has acoustic properties. Whispers carry across rooms without echo. There is something intentional here, something that speaks through blood, bone, and geometry. Decker retrieved 7 documents before the fire teams arrived. 1, known only as Document 13, contains an internal Ravencroft prophecy: when the Spirit has claimed its 7th saint of flesh and silence, the gate shall open. And those who sleep in absence will speak through the faithful geometry. Faithful geometry. Not metaphor. Design. Architecture. Ritual as circuitry. That's the forbidden layer of this story. What if these rituals weren't just expressions of madness or control, but invitations? What if they open channels, not symbolic ones, but real? Decker's notes mention physiological side effects after spending time in the catacombs. Migraines. Blackouts. Vivid dreams of faceless beings arranging human parts into diagrams. He wrote, I do not believe they worship anything we would call God. They were building a broadcast tower, for voices beneath time. 3 weeks later, Decker disappeared. His home burned to the ground. No remains found. His final entry simply read, they heard me listening. Why would federal authorities suppress this? Because what the Ravencrofts tapped into wasn't unique. It's mirrored in ancient cults across Mesopotamia, pre-Incan Peru, and certain Siberian shamans. A repeating signal, wrapped in ritual, encoded in suffering. What Decker stumbled onto was a technology of consciousness, and here's the danger, versions of it still exist. Not in churches, but in state departments. Defense contracts. Foundations with names you trust, because if pain is a frequency, someone is still broadcasting. Next, we'll trace that signal forward, from the catacombs to the Cold War to modern psychological warfare. You're not just watching a story. You're decoding your own programming. You were never taught how to think, you were taught how to obey, efficiently, politely, and above all, quietly. The Ravencrofts did it with crosses and candles. But today, it's done with screens, slogans, and algorithms. Let me show you how the signal evolved. In 1952, a secret wing of the CIA launched Project Artichoke, the precursor to MKUltra. Publicly, it was about interrogation techniques. Privately, it was about something else, and mapping trauma into obedience, precisely what the Ravencrofts perfected over a century earlier. Why would the US government study cults like the Church of the Pure Spirit? Because cults are laboratories of control. And the Ravencrofts weren't amateurs, they created multi-generational compliance without electricity, media, or surveillance. Imagine what could be achieved with modern tools. In a classified memo dated 1956, recovered through FOIA litigation, a CIA behavioral scientist wrote, the Ravencroft model represents a pure form of psychological architecture. Pain is the entry point. Guilt the gateway. Ritual repetition is the scaffold. With sufficient reinforcement, identity dissolves and is replaced with a chosen construct. That's not theory. That's replication. The Church of the Pure Spirit became a case study for modern coercion programs, used in everything from military training to media design. You think your tastes are your own? Your beliefs? Your fears, they are curated. Structured. Planted. You've been conditioned to crave distractions, to fear stillness, to submit to invisible rhythms that dictate your worth, your place, your function. Let me ask you this, why is modern culture obsessed with suffering that's entertaining but never liberating? Why do you binge shows about trauma but never learn how to process your own? Why are you flooded with false empowerment mantras, but no path to genuine mastery? Because the STEM took the Ravencroft formula, and scaled it. Instead of catacombs, they built echo chambers. Instead of ritual robes, they gave you curated personas. Instead of forced purification, they gave you engineered inadequacy, so you'd beg for belonging. They don't need chains anymore. They use psycho-spiritual mirrors, and let you trap yourself. You were born into a world where freedom is a slogan and obedience is sold as identity, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's the danger. That's the gift. In the next section, we'll break down the three-stage architecture of spiritual enslavement, and how elite systems apply it globally, from military psyops to influencer marketing. You falling deeper now? That's good. Let's keep going. There are three stages to perfect control, not the control of laws or fences, but of perception. Of the soul. The Ravencrofts didn't invent it. They inherited it. Modern institutions didn't create it. They refined it. This is the architecture of spiritual enslavement. Stage 1, isolation. Every system of deep control begins by severing the subject from their past identity. Family, language, memory, even name. The Ravencrofts called it the first death. You were not allowed to speak of your life before the church. Journals were burned. Possessions sold. Letters from home forbidden. In MKUltra, it was sensory deprivation and disinformation. Today, it's information overload, too many choices. Too much noise. So your inner voice becomes a whisper, and they replace it with theirs. Stage 2, the guilt rituals. This is where the system installs its authority. The Ravencrofts forced followers to confess imagined sins and then suffer for them. Fasting, pain, humiliation. But the punishment never ended. The guilt was never cured. Modern parallels are everywhere. Endless apologies. Performative remorse. Public shame rituals online. You're taught to self-flagellate for beliefs you don't even remember forming. Why? Because guilt creates vulnerability, and vulnerability creates compliance. Stage 3, a substitution. This is where the real programming begins. The Ravencrofts offered purity, community, salvation, but only if you obeyed without question. You didn't just worship the spirit. You surrendered your agency. Look around. Every dominant institution does the same. Corporations offer you purpose, through products, governments offer you safety, through obedience, social platforms offer you identity, through curated outrage. This is not freedom, this is metaphysical colonization. You were taught to hate your instincts, doubt your truth, fear your voice. You were programmed to outsource your value to systems designed to harvest your energy. The Ravencrofts used ropes and cold stone. Today, it's pixels and dopamine loops. But the blueprint remains the same. Why does this matter? Because once you see the pattern, you can break it, not with rebellion, but with sovereignty. Next, we uncover how the Ravencrofts manipulated collective will, creating trance states that turned crowds into extensions of their command. And how those techniques are still used at rallies, in branding, and even national tragedies. This isn't conspiracy. It's method. Keep watching. You remembering who you were before the program began. In 1843, the Ravencrofts conducted a ritual known internally as the Unison Event. It wasn't about torture. It wasn't about elevation. It was about commanding the collective mind. Over 200 followers gathered in the sanctuary. According to recovered notes, the ceremony began at 3:33 a.m., a time the Ravencrofts believed was the hour when the veil is thinnest. For 3 hours, the congregation was subjected to sound frequencies, generated by instruments built by Deacon Silas himself. Chimes, low tonal gongs, human voices harmonized into layered chants. Eyewitnesses described the experience as transcendent, disorienting, and impossible to resist. The goal? Not worship, synchronization. When a group enters a shared trance state, individual resistance collapses. What remains is a single organism, one will, one mind, one direction. Now pause and ask yourself, how different is that from modern stadium rallies, from megachurches drenched in lighting, smoke, music, and controlled emotion, from corporate launches where you're made to chant slogans, cry at product unveilings, scream with strangers over manufactured meaning? These are not accidents. These are orchestrations. Modern advertisers and political strategists study events like the Unison. A leaked 1986 Rand Corporation memo states a human cognition becomes highly malleable when exposed to synchronized stimuli, especially under conditions of emotional vulnerability. Group alignment may be achieved in under 11 minutes using structured sound and light environments. Now you know why national ceremonies are timed down to the second, why mass shootings are followed by identical language cycles, why every war needs a soundtrack. The Ravencrofts didn't just control individuals. They pioneered control of the hive mind, and in 2025, it's happening at a scale they could never have imagined. You not being sold. A product. You being entrained into predictable responses, predictable fears, predictable desires. This is the next evolution of the spiritual machine. Pain is no longer personal. It's mass-engineered. Now ask yourself, why are you made to feel powerless, when your attention is the most valuable currency on earth? Because your perception is the battlefield, and once they have that, they own everything. In the next section, I'll reveal the hidden connections between Ravencroft ideology and the psychological warfare tactics used in Operation Northwoods, Project Stargate, and modern AI content moderation. This isn't about the past. It's about your present, and your chains. They've turned your perception into a weapon, against yourself. You're not lost. You've been engineered to drift, not by accident. Not by chance, but by design. The Ravencrofts knew the mind could fracture under pressure, but with enough repetition, that fracture could be shaped. Bent. Repurposed. In 1850, a document titled The Vessel Protocol was written by Deacon Silas. Hidden behind biblical metaphors, it outlines something chillingly modern. A soul, once divided, may be rewritten. But only if it believes the new voice is its own. This was not theology. It was identity reprogramming. Fast forward to the 20th century. Operation Northwoods, a proposed false flag plan by the U.S. government in 1962 to incite public support for war through staged civilian attacks. Sound familiar? Manufacture trauma. Provide the villain. Offer salvation, control perception. Control response. Project Stargate, official CIA research into remote viewing, psychic spying, and consciousness manipulation. Laugh if you want. But follow the funding. They weren't chasing fantasy. They were probing the edges of will. Just like Prophet Caleb, who believed he could implant thoughts across distances through spiritual resonance, and now We live under the silent code of algorithmic obedience. Modern AIs don't just serve you content, they shape your emotional spectrum, what you see, what you fear, what you desire. It's all curated, every swipe, every scroll, every ad that makes your pulse jump. They're not random. They are rituals. Micro-initiations. Content moderation isn't about safety. It's about narrative containment. If an idea threatens the structure, gone. If it inspires too much independent will, shadow banned. If it awakens the wrong question, they flood you with noise until your intuition drowns. Sound familiar? The Church of the Pure Spirit had the chamber of silence, where dissenters were locked until their false selves dissolved. Today, they don't need walls. They use digital isolation. Remove you from reach. Mute your voice. Replace your message with simulations. You think the Ravencrofts are gone? No, they were just absorbed. Their doctrine became protocol. Their rituals became platforms, and here's the truth that will either set you free, or break you. You are the ritual now, your suffering is the offering. Your belief is the altar, and they are still feeding. In the next section, we cross the halfway point. If you've made it this far, you're already changing, but I want you to prove it. Comment below, I return to the forgotten fire. Type it twice. 1 for who you were. 1 for who you're becoming. This is how we break the spell. Ready for the descent? Let's go deeper. Most men live their entire lives without ever seeing the walls of their cage, but you? You've seen the cracks. You felt the pull, something ancient, wrong, unfinished. Now I'm going to show you what's on the other side. After the Ravencroft brothers perfected psychological obedience, they turned to the next phase, external control through internal collapse. This is where doctrine became infection. By 1852, they implemented what they called the mirror doctrine. It was simple, elegant, and devastating. There is no enemy but the self. All suffering originates from within. On the surface, it sounds empowering. But here's the twist. Once a man believes every wound is self-inflicted, he stops resisting. He doesn't fight. He repents, even if his tormentor stands over him with a knife. Now pause. Zoom out. Look at our world. How many men are trained to believe their pain is their fault, that their depression is weakness, that their loneliness is deserved, that their failure is proof of unworthiness. Self-help. Wellness. Hustle culture. Each offers the illusion of freedom, while burying the root problem of the system is designed to hollow you out. This is the mirror doctrine 2.0. Modern man is gaslit into silence, told to meditate instead of confront. To manifest instead of rebel. To forgive predators in the name of inner peace. Meanwhile, the predators grow fatter, stronger, untouchable. The Ravencrofts fed off this reversal. They'd beat a man, starve him, humiliate him, then ask him, what flaw in you called this pain upon yourself? And he would weep with gratitude for the lesson. That's not faith. That's systemic spiritual vampirism, and it's still happening. Look at institutions that demand you apologize for existing. Look at movements that teach you to mutilate your identity in the name of progress. Look at leaders who sin publicly, then cleanse themselves. With rehearsed vulnerability and crocodile tears. The elite learned from the Ravencrofts. When you make guilt sacred, obedience becomes voluntary. But guilt is not truth, pain is not proof of righteousness, and forgiveness without justice is ritual suicide. You're beginning to see it now. In the next section, we'll expose the black alchemy behind emotional currency, how institutions extract power from your grief, your trauma, your confession, and transmute it into influence, profit, and control. You're not just waking up. You're remembering what they forced you to forget. Most men live their entire lives without ever seeing the walls of their cage, but you? You've seen the cracks. You felt the pull, something ancient, wrong, unfinished. Now I'm going to show you what's on the other side. After the Ravencroft brothers perfected psychological obedience, they turned to the next phase, external control through internal collapse. This is where doctrine became infection. By 1852, they implemented what they called the mirror doctrine. It was simple, elegant, and devastating. There is no enemy but the self. All suffering originates from within. On the surface, it sounds empowering. But here's the twist. Once a man believes every wound is self-inflicted, he stops resisting. He doesn't fight. He repents, even if his tormentor stands over him with a knife. Now pause. Zoom out. Look at our world. How many men are trained to believe their pain is their fault, that their depression is weakness, that their loneliness is deserved, that their failure is proof of unworthiness. Self-help. Wellness. Hustle culture. Each offers the illusion of freedom, while burying the root problem of the system is designed to hollow you out. This is the mirror doctrine 2.0. Modern man is gaslit into silence, told to meditate instead of confront. To manifest instead of rebel. To forgive predators in the name of inner peace. Meanwhile, the predators grow fatter, stronger, untouchable. The Ravencrofts fed off this reversal. They'd beat a man, starve him, humiliate him, then ask him, "What flaw in you called this pain upon yourself?" And he would weep with gratitude for the lesson. That's not faith. That's systemic spiritual vampirism, and it's still happening. Look at institutions that demand you apologize for existing. Look at movements that teach you to mutilate your identity in the name of progress. Look at leaders who sin publicly, then cleanse themselves. With rehearsed vulnerability and crocodile tears. The elite learned from the Ravencrofts that when you make guilt sacred, obedience becomes voluntary. But guilt is not truth, pain is not proof of righteousness, and forgiveness without justice is ritual suicide. You're beginning to see it now. In the next section, we'll expose the black alchemy behind emotional currency, how institutions extract power from your grief, your trauma, your confession, and transmute it into influence, profit, and control. You're not just waking up. You're remembering what they forced you to forget. Consent, the sacred word of modern control. But what if the thing you consented to was never yours to choose? The Ravencrofts understood this better than most governments ever have. In 1854, they introduced what they called the covenant of flesh, a contract every follower signed in blood. It stated, "My body is no longer mine. My will is subject to purification. My soul is the property of the spirit." The document was symbolic, yes, but it created a binding frame in the minds of the believers, because once you convince someone they agreed to their own imprisonment, resistance dies. The same spell is cast on you now. Digitally, you check the box. You scroll the terms, you think you're in control, but behind every "I agree" lies ritual binding, not by law.by belief. Your operating system, your apps, your job contract, they harvest your attention, your movement, your biometrics, and wrap it in the illusion of consent. But were you truly informed? Were you truly free? Or were you pressured, distracted, exhausted, and led? That's not consent. That's ceremonial submission. The Ravencrofts didn't just ask for loyalty, they created a mental structure so complete that leaving felt like spiritual suicide. It's the same today. Why do most men stay in jobs that hollow them out, in systems that betray them, in beliefs that no longer serve them? Because they were taught. You signed. You said yes. You chose this. But what if your yes was manufactured? This is why the Ravencroft cult thrived for over 30 years. Their victims didn't feel enslaved, they felt righteously obligated, even unto death. Ask yourself, how many things in your life are you enduring not because you want them, but because you believe you asked for them? The tragedy is not enslavement, the tragedy is when a man puts his own name on the chain, and that's what they're counting on. But once you see the ritual, you can refuse the altar. In the next section, we'll confront the ultimate weapon of the Ravencrofts, the echo doctrine, the method by which they infected generations without touching a single soul. This is where the legacy begins to outlive the blood. Stay close. You'll feel it breathing behind you. Legacy isn't always written in blood, sometimes, it's whispered through generations, like a virus that speaks your name. The Ravencrofts called it the echo doctrine. On the surface, it was a spiritual teaching, about resonance, memory, the soul's vibration after death, but in practice, it was something far more dangerous. By 1855, the brothers had perfected their rituals of psychological inheritance. Before a follower was elevated, a term that now clearly meant sacrificed, they were required to undergo a final rite, and they recorded a message, not in writing, not on paper, but spoken, repeated, memoized by others. My suffering is my gift. Pain cleanses the bloodline. I choose this path that others may walk free. These mantras were then taught to the victims' surviving family members, especially children, especially sons. They were told their parent had transcended, that their agony was sacred, that they should aspire to the same fate, and in this way, the Ravencrofts didn't need to kill every generation, they just needed to seed reverence for the wound. Fast forward to today. You see it in broken homes where sons are taught to be silent. In families where trauma is inheritance, and pain is proof of love. In cultures where fathers die inside, and their sons call it tradition, that is the echo doctrine. A lie, disguised as legacy. A wound passed down like a birthright. You didn't ask for this inheritance, but you're holding it. It's in your beliefs about what a man must endure, about when to speak, when to fight, when to bleed quietly. It's the voice that says, if I suffer long enough, maybe I'll finally deserve peace. Know that voice is not yours. It belongs to them. The Ravencrofts may be dead, but the system they built, the Echo, still lives. In institutions that glorify sacrifice but never protect the sacrificial. In religions that promise redemption through obedience, but deliver only repetition. In governments that offer honor in exchange for silence. This is how evil survives, not by staying alive, but by staying relevant. In the next section, I'll show you how the Ravencrofts embedded their doctrine into early American psychology and education, ensuring that even long after their names were buried, their methods would remain disguised, updated, weaponized. If you're still watching, comment this phrase twice to mark your transformation, and the chain ends here. The chain ends here. Let the algorithm know you're no longer asleep. We're only halfway down this rabbit hole, and from here, the truth gets louder. You were taught to sit still. To raise your hand for permission. To minimize what they gave you, and forget what you felt. That wasn't education. It was initiation. By 1857, the Ravencrofts had begun grooming the next generation, but not with knives, fire, or blood. They turned to curriculum. Within the compound, they created a school of sacred instruction. Children aged 5 and up were taught Ravencroft doctrine disguised as scripture, history, and moral philosophy. The lessons were led, not to inform, but to reprogram. Truth is what the Spirit reveals. Pain is the price of purity. Those who question, wander in darkness. These mantras weren't just recited. They were embedded through repetition, call and response drills, and silent hours of prayer in pitch-black rooms, and then, they institutionalized it. Deacon Silas began corresponding with education reformers across the Northeast. He sent writings under pseudonyms to journals discussing moral instruction and discipline-based learning. He advocated for rote memorization, authoritative classroom structures, and delayed gratification through obedience. These ideas weren't new, but the Ravencrofts knew how to weaponize them, because once you teach a child that obedience equals virtue, you never need to control the man. He'll control himself. Now look around, the echoes remain. Why do most schools still separate thinking from feeling? Why is conformity rewarded more than creativity? Why are boys punished for intensity but praised for passivity? It's not random. It's ritual continuation. What the Ravencrofts began as cult doctrine became state policy, education became indoctrination, and your mind, it became the first cage. Even the concept of mental illness was touched by this legacy. Early psychiatric texts, some traced back to former Ravencroft acolytes, defined rebellion, disobedience, and emotional volatility as pathologies, not spiritual awakenings. Not signs of trauma, but diseases. You see what they did? They made the response to abuse into a disorder. So the abused would self-blame, and the system would remain clean. The doctrine survived the fire. It rewrote the manuals. It trained the teachers. In the next section, I'll reveal how the Ravencroft lineage survived into the 20th century, hiding within legal, academic, and psychiatric institutions, and how you may have already been touched by its shadow, without ever knowing their name. We are crossing into forbidden territory now. The trail doesn't vanish. It becomes a mirror. They are called many names, the continuity architects, the custodians, the hidden orders, but within Ravencroft's private correspondences, they were simply known as the table. 7 chairs. 7 bloodlines. 7 centuries of unbroken influence. They weren't prophets, they weren't priests, they were engineers of reality. Each Ravencroft brother answered to one of them, and when the Church of the Pure Spirit fell in 1854, the brothers didn't die as martyrs, they vanished, extracted, pulled into the shadows by the very ones who had empowered them. Now ask yourself this: if they had the power to create a self-sustaining death cult under the guise of faith, what else have they built? The answer is simple: everything. Banks, universities, therapeutic institutions, even the algorithms you scroll today. You think culture evolves, you think trends emerge organically. No, they are released, like plagues, every few decades. New belief systems are introduced to express yourself. Deconstruct gender. Dismantle tradition. Trust the science. All under banners of liberation, but behind the curtain, the table decides which illusions will guide the next generation into predictable collapse, because collapse is not failure for them, it's harvest. Every breakdown generates chaos, and chaos creates craving, craving for order, meaning, safety, the very things only they can offer once the old ways are burned down. This is what the Ravencrofts called the cycle of reforging. Break the mind. Empty the soul, offer the new God, control the rebirth. You were not meant to see this pattern. You meant to feel it as natural, but now, you're beginning to notice, aren't you? Every time society shifts, it's not evolution. It's ritual, and the architects keep their hands clean, because they don't act publicly, they influence inwardly. through advisors, consultants, ph. philanthropists, media moguls, and synthetic messiahs. But here's the most chilling part: they have no allegiance to good or evil, only to continuity. Their mission isn't domination, it's preservation of their code across time, even if it means erasing everything human. And that code, it didn't begin in the 1800s. In the next section, we go deeper, tracing the table's origins back to ancient Alexandria, the forbidden rites of Serapis, and the first template of spiritual control encoded into Western civilization. You've now reached the edge of the abyss, and beyond it lies only transformation or oblivion. This series has pulled you through centuries of suppression, ritual, manipulation, and psychological weaponry. The story of the Ravencrofts wasn't just history. It was a blueprint, and now that you've seen the machinery behind the veil, you can't unsee it. But knowledge alone isn't enough. If you felt something stir deep inside, something cold, ancient, and alert, that wasn't fear. It was recognition. Comment below the phrase "I shatter the mirror." Comment it twice, because that's what this is, not entertainment, initiation. You've just descended through 33 levels of forbidden knowledge, but the real test comes next. What will you do with it? If you're ready to go even deeper, to learn what they're building next and how to protect your mind from it, subscribe, and prepare, because evil never dies. It only evolves, and now, so must you.